If you're here for the Scrum bite-sized thing, welcome. If you're not here, push off. My name's Chris. I'm Agile coach, part of the Agile Way, which is the digital transformation work stream responsible for helping nudge the organization to adopt more agile ways of working. And we're going to talk about for 30 minutes about Scrum. So just to get a sense of who's here, who actually works in a Scrum team? Not so many. Okay, great. You're our experts. So most people here have not worked in a Scrum team. That's great. So no I'm talking to. I'll just wait a second for the nice design. Great. So Scrum is the most adopted of all agile methodologies. Roughly speaking, about 85% of teams who are doing Agile say that they're doing Scrum or doing Scrum plus something else. So it's the most massively dominant Agile framework. It's about 20 years old. There are others that people use either in addition or instead of, but Scrum is the one most people are using. And the message I want you to take away today is that it's quite hard to do Scrum. So that's the thing you have to remember. If you're not finding it hard, you're probably not doing it right. It's kind of the mantra. Just thinking about Agile in general for a moment, I just want to talk about some Agile principles that you need to accept, otherwise Scrum will make no sense, right? So one of the things about Scrum is that it's very important that we connect our work to customers. So one of the problems that we have in our work generally is that if we get disconnected to customers, get too focused maybe on profit, for example, those kind of things, then we don't end up doing the right thing. And there's an assumption behind all of Agile, and particularly Scrum, is that actually focusing on what the customer needs will lead to profits rather than focusing on profits directly. The other assumption you might say that lies behind Scrum is that work is iterative learning. So there's a need to take a step and find out something and take another step and find out something. We don't know the answer up front. So for example, we don't know what customers want up front. If you know what customers want up front, you don't need Scrum. You can just go and make a big plan and go and execute it and get it done. If you know how to build it, if you know exactly what to do, again, you don't need an iterative approach. Work is not iterative learning for you. So if your context is such that all those things are not uncertain, then Scrum's not the right answer for you. Scrum works because the assumption is that you need to take a step and see. Okay? And then the other assumption that lies behind all Agile methods as well, typically, is that the team is kind of the unit of performance, not the individual. And particularly teams that stay together perform together. Do people have that experience? So maybe a typical team may well take a year maybe, I don't know, on average, in order to get to a sweet spot of performing together. So you don't want to be changing teams around all the time. These are the kind of fundamental assumptions that lie behind Scrum. So I want to talk about why Scrum is hard. So I'm not going to focus in on the kind of superficial things of Scrum. So some of you may have heard of daily stand-ups. You have a meeting every day to coordinate the team's work. Takes 15 minutes, blah, blah. I'm not going to focus on those things because they're the easy bits. I'm going to focus on the difficult bits because the difficult bits are the bits that add the value. And there's 5 bits that I'd just like us to sort of think about today. So I'd like a volunteer to read something out. People who sat in the front now read. Oh, we have somebody here. Could you read that out clearly? The bit in the box, please.
Okay. Deliver at least monthly. Teams who don't really know what is needed or how to meet the needs are best served by trying to deliver something quickly, say within a month, and getting feedback. Is that?
Thank you very much. Very well read. Thank you. So we talked here about work is iterative learning. We need to take a step and see, find out what the customer wants, find out how to build it, whatever it is in your context. Scrum is suggesting there's a kind of sweet spot for a team and it's kind of less than a month. So more than a month, taking a step of more than a month is too big. Why? No reason, just experience. So the people who created Scrum in the late 90s said, it seems like for this kind of work that we're doing, if we go more than a month without finding out whether what we've done works or not, that's just too long. So don't do anything that lasts more than a month. Okay, most teams are working on a fortnightly. If I go around other companies and I see the step length that most teams are operating on, it's more like a fortnight. It's more typical. But Scrum says you can go up to a month, take a step, find out whether what you've done adds value, so on, do your learning, and then take the next step. So that's the first thing that's hard. Now that's pretty tricky, right? I mean, we're not talking about designing a thing or testing a thing within a month. We're talking about building the whole thing, getting it in the hands of customers potentially within a month. That puts the pressure on us, right? That's the nature of Scrum, is that it's designed to put the squeeze on us, right? So clearly for us with our dependencies and teams doing that and teams doing that, this is a mammoth ask, right? And clearly we're not going to be there straight away. Okay, we're going to maybe be able to do part of the process within a month, and then we'll have some release process or something afterwards. Okay, that's a good starting point. Scrum, the design of Scrum is that it shows you the promised land. The promised land is do the whole thing in less than a month. The other area where it puts pressure on you is not just your releasing processes, it puts pressure on your product management processes to actually define something that's valuable that you can get built in a month, right? Something that's small enough, something that matters enough that can be actually done within a month, right? So, Scrum's really designed to put the squeeze on you. That's the notion of Scrum, right? Which is why I keep saying it's hard. If it's not hard, you're probably missing the hard bits. You're doing the stand-ups and you're doing meetings and you're having the sprint retrospectives and all this and that and the other, but you're not getting to the point, which is driving towards this monthly piece. Okay? I guess the people sort of see why that would make sense, that that's kind of a good approach to drive towards that. Yeah? Good. Okay, second point. Can I have another volunteer, another reader? Would you mind sending that?
Small teams. Teams perform best when they are not too large, say less than 11 people. Any other questions?
Thank you very much. That's the yeah. Great. So, second point about Scrum that's worth, and the second difficult thing is small team. So don't have too many people in the team. Kind of self-evident in a way. If you've got 50 people in your team, it's hard to get the same level of coordination as if there's just 5 of you, right? And it would seem that there is a kind of natural breaking point around 11 people, right? That's kind of more than that. The teams tend to splinter anyway into sub-teams, right? That's the maximum point. So don't have too many people in your team. This is the unit of performance. Don't make it too big. And that's a challenge for us with all our different specialisms or technologies. Yeah, but wait a minute, we need somebody who can do Android in the team, somebody who can do iOS in the team, and somebody who can do web in the team, and somebody who can do automated testing in the team. And suddenly, if they're individual people in terms of skills, suddenly you have a team of 30, right? Don't do that. You need to work out a way such that you either need less skills, or that individuals can then take on multiple skills, right? And that then may have implications for your architecture. You might need a simpler architecture because you need fewer skills. That might be an implication of that. All kinds of implications come from having small teams, but it's pretty obvious that bigger teams end up being kind of unwieldy and it's hard to communicate. I think people generally get that. Third point. Be the reader. Everybody's like, no, don't choose me. Just in the box.
Teams perform best when they have no dependencies.
Thank you very much. So teams perform best when they have no dependencies. Okay? Again, kind of obvious. Dependency hell is something that perhaps many of us have experienced here. Depending on somebody else who's got other priorities, another team, another funding, other things, somebody who sits far away, etc., etc. Clearly that's going to slow you down. So organize the work not to have dependencies. That's what Scrum said. If you want high performance, this is a model for high performance. So get rid of your dependencies. Structure your work in a way so that that's not there. I'm not saying that's easy, right? I'm not saying that's easy at all. Nobody knows how to do it. Scrum doesn't tell you how to do it. Scrum says, this is the model that works. So try and get towards this model. So if you find you've got some kind of dependency, work out how to minimize it, eliminate it, because that will drive high performance. So one thing is around the shape of your teams. Try and bring the dependencies into the team. So if you were dependent on a team that did X, some sort of specialist testing, can that specialist testing be brought inside the team? Or can it be somehow re-engineered so we don't need it? Bearing in mind you can't just bring the people in because that will give you a bigger team. So no dependencies is the model. Who would like to go next? Everybody, I've exhausted everybody on the front. Thank you very much.
Teams perform best when one person who is close to the team decides on priorities.
So teams perform best, thank you very much, when one person who is close to the team decides on the priorities. Pretty clear, right? That's kind of obvious, right? You don't want somebody who's far from the work deciding on the priorities. You want somebody who's close to the work and somebody who's available to the team. Now in Scrum we call that person the product owner, and their job is simply just to prioritize, to say we'll do A, not B, first. Okay? Now, this is very difficult for us as a large organization. We have distributed level of authority, you might say, and the notion that somebody who is, you might say, specialist and perhaps junior in inverted commas, junior enough to work with one team, could make all the decisions for that team, seems kind of like a real big ask, because clearly the people who tend to have the authority tend to work above many teams, whereas the people who are available to the team tend to work with just one team, and you're looking for somebody who's available to the team who also has the authority, and that's the squeeze. So can we decentralize authority so that it's close to the team in one person, not a committee, one person? That's, again, the squeeze that Scrum puts on us in terms of, this is a high performance model. If you want this high performance, these are the things that work. People get that? Yeah? Yeah, it's kind of, these things are not, in a sense, they're not rocket science. Like, they're all kind of, yeah, I understand that. I understand why that would work, why that would be good. It's just very hard to achieve, right? So that's the notion of Scrum. It's a framework for improvement. It's a framework to say, we're not doing these things right now, but we can get a step closer to doing these things. Let's not get depressed about it. What step can we take next? And that's the sort of magic of Scrum. So to some extent, you're never really there. You're always just approaching this kind of promised land. Last one, last victim. Can I come in the second one?
Teams perform best when they decide within the team who does what. This is not externally imposed by job roles, political structures, and so on.
Thank you very much. So teams perform best when they decide how to organize the work. Okay, so the notion is the prioritizer, the product owner decides, but then the team just actually do the management of the work. They don't just do the work, they manage the work. They decide who to do that. And the thing is, they don't necessarily control what the priorities are. So today there could be a priority which requires a lot of testing. Next week there's no testing required. So if I'm a tester and only do testing, I'm going to work really hard this week, and next week I'm not going to have anything to do, right? So the way we've managed that in the past is that we then say, okay, next week you go work somewhere else with another team. That violates the kind of stable team kind of principle. So we're trying to have a stable team rather than just switching people in and out as an approach. So what do I do if I only have testing skills in the week where there's no testing required? Well, perhaps I can help with something else. And that's the notion of no special roles. So in a true Scrum team, the only role is that of team member. Okay, I may have testing skills, deep testing skills, I may be really expert, I'm not necessarily a generalist, but I will turn my hand to whatever's needed to help the team goals in that particular week. So we talk about T-shaped individuals, people who are kind of deep expertise in one area, but have, some expertise in some other areas. Again, it's the variation in the work that drives the need for that kind of profile. It's not the same as a generalist. A generalist is kind of, they're kind of a horizontal person. They have no depth to their team. Right? So a T-shaped person has some depth in some places, but can also, because of the variation in the work, be able to help with what's going on. And maybe the things that I help with as a tester, I'm not as efficient and effective at as somebody who was doing it all the time. But on the other hand, that's a trade-off because of the performance we get from having a long-lived team that works together and performs together. So I say no specialist role. I've put a little asterisk on my post-it note here because there are a couple of specialist roles in Scrum. One is the product owner, of course. There's only one person prioritizes, and of course, if the product owner goes on holiday, actually Scrum doesn't say anything what to do at that point, right? So it is a kind of single point of failure. And then there is another role defined in Scrum, which is that of Scrum Master, which originally was, the notion of a Scrum Master. That was actually a bit of a joke in the beginning that it was called Scrum Master, and now it's sort of caught on. But the Scrum Master is not really in the process. The Scrum Master's role is basically to help the team and the product owner move in this direction. So to make sure Scrum is enacted. So if things are going well, the Scrum Master in Scrum actually has nothing to do. If you're already doing these things, the Scrum Master is not doing anything. But if there are gaps, if we're not doing this, if the team size is too big, or if you have dependency, then the Scrum Master's job is to help the team move in this direction. Does that make sense? So it's not a sort of, as described in the Scrum Guide, it's not a doing role, it's a facilitation role or an assisting role. It's not a management role in the sense of line manager or anything like that. It's simply a role to make sure Scrum is understood and enacted. So that's a specialist role. Okay? Could be shared by more than one person. So product owner is one person, Scrum Master is a role. They're slightly different. Does that make sense? So these are the hard things, the 5 hard things that you kind of need to remember about Scrum. And we can talk, we'll do probably another session where we can talk about the ceremonies of Scrums and exactly what the Scrum Master does. But it's not where the value is. This is where the value is, because this is where it's hard. This is the thing that drives change. And that's the great thing about Scrum, is that it drives change. It forces us to look at how we're organized and try and go in this direction. And it's painful. So it's kind of my conclusion, right? Firstly, it's supposed to be hard. Secondly, it gets results. So the problem with all these kind of things, when you read about, okay, does Agile work, is it better, is it worse, is that it's very hard to do an isolated experiment. But the number of case studies now, because bear in mind this has been going now almost 20 years, Scrum has been going, the number of case studies where teams have delivered extraordinary performance as a result of having adopted this approach is getting kind of pretty, it's getting pretty impressive basically. So it does seem to work, and you can see why it would work. You can see why these things make sense. People like it, I think, is the other conclusion I take about it. So people like working this way, generally speaking. People like working in teams where they know the person making the priorities and they're available. They like working in teams where they can all have a shared goal and work together and stuff. They like delivering value. People don't like working on projects that don't deliver value for years. People like immediate feedback. So generally speaking, people like this. It's not, the people in the teams really, want to work like this as a general rule. However, the transition to getting there is probably painful, right? Because we're not there now, we're somewhere else completely different, and each step will require dismantling of something we do, or maybe we do quite well, in order to get closer to this model. So I guess we're probably not doing it yet, is almost certainly true. If you want to learn more about Scrum, because this is like really the 20-minute tour, if you point your browser internally here at this URL here, tinyurl.com/agileway, there's a number of links for you to look more at. There's a book, there's a video, there's a web article, however you prefer to learn. There's some good introductory material about Scrum. We have a couple of minutes for questions. Any questions? Or did I cover it all perfectly? Yeah.
I actually have two. The first is, wouldn't you say that it's actually hard to maintain a constant communication flow? For example, within a day, we can have different tasks, and those tasks can collide within each other.
Right.
Wouldn't you say that's part of the hard parts of the Scrum?
So you're saying that you're doing the work, if I compare it, say, So I thought this would be like this, and an hour later I found it's like
Yeah.
something else, and
Yeah.
it's twice as big, or requires some help from somebody over here who's already doing something else.
Yeah, and requires constant communication flow, and sometimes that can be hard because some people can get like fixated into what it's doing, focus, and not share that information. How would you approach to that?
Yeah, so, well, I guess firstly that was the case however we approached the work, whether we're doing an agile thing or whatever. If there's things to be learned, there's things to be learned. I suppose what Scrum provides then is you've got a small team of people who you're interacting with. So you've got some who you know because you've been with them for a while. So you've got some good sort of social communication. A lot of people say that a lot of this is process. The agile approach is very human in about the social aspect. So you've got that connection there. And then in terms of process, you have at the very least a daily meeting where you say, oh, I thought this would be tested in a couple of hours, but it's turned out to be a couple of days, or whatever your thing is. And you've got that resyncing point as a team at very least daily. So I guess Scrum supports like that. But again, Scrum's trying to find the sweet spot. You don't want a synchronization meeting every hour.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that would be pretty annoying, I think.
Yeah, that's a good answer.
Yeah.
And the second question that I will have is, if we're changing, right, in order to be more agile, wouldn't it be hard to make that change, to be comfortable with change? Some people like to stay in one way. So why is not in the hard part to embrace the change? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's no question. It is extremely difficult to do that, and the entire world is grappling with that, right?
Yeah.
I don't think this is kind of like. If I'd given this presentation 15 years ago, you could say this is something like the long-haired guys are doing. It's like it's a hippie thing. It's a bit on the edge. That's not where Scrum is right now. Scrum is mainstream. Everybody's doing this. All our competitors are putting major effort into going in this direction. So it's kind of like, and across all industries as well. There's nobody who's not sort of going that way, right? So we're going with the flow here now. It's not early majority, right? It's probably even late majority.
Sorry, Scrum is one from software development.
Yeah.
Do you think it's applicable for a lot of other projects?
Yeah, really good
Especially
question.
IT-related projects
Yeah,
as well?
excellent question. Glad you asked it because I didn't cover that. So yes, context of Scrum is software development. All the early practitioners.
Can you repeat the question?
Sorry, the question was, is Scrum only for software development? And really glad you asked that, because if you look at the history of Scrum, the early practitioners were all software development people, all of them. People who wrote the Agile Manifesto, all software people, okay? But then people found, actually, well, this kind of applies to any kind of knowledge work where work is iterative learning. Like, if there's a large component of learning, this approach makes sense. If you're doing something, on the other hand, that's repetitive, the classic example is like manufacturing. I'm making a car door, I beat it into shape, I take the next one, I beat it into shape. I don't learn anything much from the first car door that tells me about the second car door. If you're in those kind of contexts, then you can just sort of plan your way out of it, and you can have bigger teams, and you can use some of these things perhaps a little bit, but fundamentally it doesn't help you that much because there's not so much learning to be had in that context. So anywhere where there's learning and uncertainty, this is a really good approach.
Yeah, but especially, for example, there's a lot of dependencies on external teams,
Yeah.
external organizations, and that sort of stuff. Scrum just fails miserably.
Yes. So if you really can't do some of these things, for example, like if you can't deliver at least monthly, like you say, well, our delivery time is 2 years because X, Y, then clearly that's not going to work here. And there are other agile approaches that you might get some benefit from. But yeah, the magic is in Scrum is following these 5 things.
But I would say, to your point, in an organization, we have so many dependencies, right? Specifically on the IT project. So, would you say that, because we have so many dependencies, actually Scrum is not applicable because it's almost impossible to be successful?
Well, that's the question, right? So nobody knows, and that's what everybody's like. How much can you eliminate or minimize them? Nobody knows because that's quite a lot of work to even find out whether it's possible.
So the best thing is to start.
Yeah, you
to
start
iterate,
start
and
somewhere.
maybe find a ways to actually
Yeah.
eliminate the dependencies.
Yeah, and actually we thought we needed that, but actually 6 months down the line, when we've got all the right people in the room and we've got the mindset about it, we find we don't need that at all. Or that's the common experience.
So I'm an advocate of waterfall. All my teams have done waterfall. I'm against Agile and so on. Right? And so your advice to start working in a different way.
Yeah.
Talk about iterative learning and step by step and so on. But clearly there's a basic set of standards in terms of the team you have, because you alluded to the fact that you just have 2 roles or 3 roles. The team member, the Scrum Master that is not needed if everything goes okay, and the product owner. But clearly, I mean, if I don't have anything, I don't know anything of Scrum in my case. Well, I've got a team of 5-6 people. I believe that we can actually start doing Scrum.
Yeah.
Is that simple, or would you
Get started.
Would you advise to have some extra support?
Generally, it's handy if you've got somebody who's already done it before, of course.
So, what is the killer role that you would advise for the team to actually start, apart from the product owner, because that is key?
Well, the easiest is getting in a Scrum Master with more experience, because it's hard to get a product owner with experience because you need knowledge of the product. So you need somebody with Santander banking knowledge, whereas a Scrum Master is much more generic skill. So it's easier to sort of float somebody like that in to a team for a period, even 6 months or whatever, to then provide the structure for this kind of thing, because they will have the experience. So that's the easiest role to bring in, I would say, in terms of support. But also seeding it from maybe another team that's already done it further down the line is also possible. Fran.
Based on that last question, once the team has the knowledge and the method itself is simplistic but difficult, as you said, is the Scrum Master a full-time job?
Oh, this is like something we can talk about for hours and hours, right? This kind of, if you get into Twitter and that, you can see that kind of goes. So there are different views on that, right? So some people say, because you never get there, there's just always layers and layers of this stuff to unpick. So the Scrum Master always needs to, there's always masses of work basically doing that. Others say after a couple of years maybe, or 6 months, whatever, you get to a point where actually there's less for the Scrum Master to do, and they can, or there's less of that role to do. Maybe the person who is a Scrum Master can do other things as well. So no, the industry doesn't agree on that, I would say, basically. It's those two viewpoints. I'm not going to hazard my personal opinion when there's so many other Agile coaches here to shoot me down.
Is there total equality amongst the team? As in, there's no hierarchy. So, I've been in teams where we have technical leads, anchors, etc.
Yeah. So in the Scrum model says don't do that, have team member, but it's not the same as saying everybody has the same skills and capacity, which is clearly not true. Some may have detailed technical expertise, and today we call that person a technical lead. In this world, we call them team member with technical skills, if you see what I mean. But then you may have some sort of, but they have no particular role in terms of the team, that the team doesn't decide. So the team may say, you take this role of, simplistically, you're so technical expert, you review everybody's code, for example, right? We could agree that within the team, but that's a team agreement that can be broken. It's not imposed by the outside, if you see what I mean. That's the notion. So it doesn't mean there's not structure in the team, but it just means that there's not externally imposed structure within the team. Thanks for
Scrum sustainable for long periods of time?
Yeah, there are teams that have done it for
Especially
decades.
when you need to deliver within short periods of time. You have got this additional overhead for ceremonies, daily standards, and stuff like that as well.
You see that as additional overhead.
You've included the word overhead.
It's overhead.
That was provocative. Is this an overhead or an enabler?
Well, that's the question, right? So the coordination that happens, so there are specific ceremonies and they are time limited in Scrum. So you cannot take up all the time with going to your sprint planning and your so on and so forth. So all those things are actually limited in terms of time. So the majority of the time is still doing the work, you might say. But these are essentially coordination meetings. So in the old way of working, there would have been coordination activity as well. So the question is it more or less than before? I don't know, it depends what you were doing before.
But it depends. Like for example, if let's just say you need to deliver at least monthly or every fortnight, for
Yeah.
example. Oh, there's a user story, you're gonna get it done. And then you've got like tons of stuff on your backlog. And once you complete this, you have to the next 2 weeks. Oh, we've got another sprint.
Yeah.
The next 2 weeks we've got another sprint.
Yeah.
We've got another sprint. So how long can a team sustain that?
Forever. So there's a value within Agile which is sustainable pace. So you set out that you're going to continue forever. So you don't have the team, but typical example would be start a sprint in the middle of the week. The reason is you don't want to finish on a Friday because you don't want people having to work really hard, staying late Friday evening or whatever to finish the sprint. You do it midweek because you want to sustain. You want a sustainable pace. That's a clear Agile value. Sustainable. Sorry.
Yeah, in the sprint,
Last question.
we pick up a user story or pick a requirement, and because of uncertainties, we commit and we start working on that. Maybe in development we identify something, so that usually skips that sprint, goes to another one, and it can go on.
Yes.
And so, on a commitment, when we plan something, this is what we're going to deliver in a 1 month, and if you miss those dates or keep planning with them, is it acceptable in sprint that we can miss those dates?
Well, to whom? Okay, I can just tell you about the model, right? So, actually in here there is no customer per se, there is the product owner. So the product owner is prioritizing, the team are doing the most important thing at any one time. So are you doing the most important thing at any one time? That's the question. That's it. But then you learn, you thought it would take a day, that day went past, it still looks like it's going to take another day, that day went, you're talking about those kind of scenarios, right? Yeah. I mean, that happens in all plans, you might say. It's kind of part of the learning. Is there a systemic problem in the way you're doing your planning? I don't know. That's for you to look at in your retrospectives. That's kind of.
But in sprint in general, if we have a date of delivery, is it acceptable to miss those dates, or do we have to?
Okay, well maybe what I can answer is in the original version of Scrum there was something called the sprint commitment. So the idea was that the team committed to, this is our sprint goal, we're gonna hit that goal. There still is the goal notion, but in the latest version of the Scrum Guide, the word commitment has disappeared completely, in fact. Didn't find that helpful. So that's a general direction. On the other hand, I don't know your specific context and what's going to happen to you if you don't meet your commitment. If you don't understand. But the general direction of the industry is to de-emphasize the notion of commitment for the sprint. Okay, we're out of time, so go here if you want to learn more. I'll be hanging around here if you've got more questions. There's going to be another one next week, is it?
2 weeks time.
2 weeks time, which is going to be about Kanban. So if Scrum didn't rock your boat, Kanban is an alternative approach which might be easier, it won't be hard, but maybe more suitable for your context. So come along in 2 weeks, learn more. Thank you. It's hard.